thank everyone for joining us just after lunch, and welcome to Catherine.
Thank you.
Delighted to have you with us, but maybe to get us started, it'd be great if you just give a little introduction to yourself, maybe your background and how you ended up with British Patient Capital. Let the audience get to know you a bit more.
Sure. So, yes, Catherine Torre. I've been working in the financial services sector for about 30 years. I started very young, clearly. I've spent most of my career working with alternative assets, so private equity, venture capital, private debt, infrastructure. But my heart has always been with the VC industry. I started my own business at the end of the 90s called ProVenture. It was perhaps a little bit early in the market to be launching a venture fund-to-fund business, but that was an incredible experience. And I think that experience from starting a business, building a fund management business, and then that business was ultimately acquired by an asset manager in Scandinavia, taught me a lot about what I was going to go on to do next when I joined the British Business Bank.
Fab. And then British Patient Capital has quite a special role, I guess, in the UK investment landscape. And I'm sure much of our audience, particularly those who are UK-based, will be aware of the name, but it'd be great, to hear in your own words, what's the organisation all about? How does it fit into the wider landscape?
Yes, so British Patient Capital was established in 2018. So we're, I think, going from our startup to scale-up phase ourselves. We form part of the commercial arm within the British Business Bank, which is the UK government's economic development bank. But the origin was that there was a piece of work that was run by Treasury in 2017 called the Patient Capital Review. And that was presided over by somebody called Damon Buffini, who came to the conclusion that actually the UK was a brilliant place to start a company, but it wasn't a particularly brilliant place to scale a business. And that was because there wasn't enough capital at that sort of later venture stage in the system to allow that to happen. So British Patient Capital was the government's response to that lack of capital in that area. We were set up as a brand new business with a funding envelope of £2.5 billion to be invested in VC funds, and also to have a co-investment strategy that would come into play sort of shortly after launch. And the whole idea was that we would go beyond seed and Series A and start to focus on Series B plus, where we saw the biggest financing gap in the UK market at the time. And I think if you roll forward 5 years later, I think that gap is even more well identified now and understood. And even though I think we've done our bit to try and close that gap, there's still a pretty significant market failure, I would say, in the UK and in other parts of Europe as well, for this later stage scale-up capital. So that's why we were brought into being.
And I guess, well, market failure perhaps for some of this audience could be opportunity as well. So in more practical terms, maybe we've got venture capital in the room, and naturally a lot of corporate venture capital, even hopefully still some of the community of scale-up companies that presented earlier. How would they go about engaging, and what are the direct opportunities to work with British Patient Capital?
I mean, the good news is, as we all know, the VC ecosystem in its broadest sense is very collaborative. So I think that provides lots of opportunities to engage, and that's actually part of how we all go about our day-to-day business. But how we work in British Patient Capital is that we've built a fund platform, so we have investments in 70 VC funds today. We have in the underlying portfolio more than 1,000 companies in our underlying portfolio. About 500 of those are in the UK, and the rest of the portfolio, the other 500 companies, are predominantly in the rest of Europe, with some exposure to North America and Asia as well. So one of the ways we engage, of course, with people in this room is that we're an investor in their funds and a significant investor in their funds, or we are a limited partner alongside them in funds that they've invested in. So that's one way where we engage. We also have a co-investment program, which we launched shortly after we were established. And that's to work alongside our own GPs when they're bringing the next funding round together for companies that they're taking to the next level. So it's possible that through our co-investment program, we will have touch points with you in the room, as you might be part of that syndicate that we're also a part of. And then most recently, coming up to about 2 years ago, we discovered that if you looked at where the VC community was investing in the UK, there was actually a dearth of investment in what we call hard tech or deep tech sectors. And to address that very specific problem, we set up a dedicated 375 million fund to invest in deep tech companies. And it's interesting that if we look at who our co-investors are, or the syndicate partners in our deep tech portfolio, there's a lot of corporate venturers that we have alongside us. And there are repeat offenders that go on that journey multiple times with us. So I think there's lots of different ways that we could engage with your audience today. And that's hopefully a journey that will continue into the future as well.
Oh, and I think that's exciting, you know, from a SETsquared partnership point of view. We naturally lean in towards a lot of deep tech companies, R&D backed companies, and it's exciting to see that it's growing. How, in terms of, I guess, the balance of the organisation, has it developed that part of investing directly? Have you seen any trends of where you've been investing, where the market's going, around that deep tech side?
So first of all, I think in terms of how we thought about the business day one, we wanted to put this platform in place, first of all, to have relationships with a broad range of managers that we could invest in but also learn from. And that's why the co-investment program came a little bit later, so we could do that learning and sort of get ourselves ready to be an effective co-investor, because we want to provide capital, of course, but also to provide more than that as a strategic investor as well. For the direct investing, though, that's quite a different business from the fund investing business and even the co-investment business. So we actually hired a brand new team to come in and act as our future fund breakthrough direct investing team. So if you look at British Patient Capital today, we're about 30 people, 20 on the fund of fund side and co-invest, and then 10 people in the direct team. And that shows you also in terms of the balance of capital, because we have 3 billion now of assets under management. About 2.5 billion of that is for the fund investing and 500 million is for direct investing. The other thing I forgot to mention, actually, in terms of sectors, life sciences is a very important theme for us, and the UK has traditionally been very strong in the science and technology around the life sciences business and sector. So we also set up a dedicated fund of funds, a mini fund of funds program specifically for the life sciences community, in recognition that life sciences moves in a different style than the rest of technology investing as well. So those are the, you know, that's the way we thought about the business. So we started funds direct, and then thought about sectors, and then thought about the skill sets that you need to effectively build a fund-to-fund platform, invest a direct fund, and be successful in a specific sector or industry.
Fab. And I guess the mentioning of life science in its own market, it's a little bit of a segue with me to mention with a SETsquared hat on that a key source, I guess, of life sciences companies of deep tech is university spin-outs. We had some great ones presenting earlier today.
Absolutely.
But it's often a market that is viewed with more caution or more challenge, perhaps, by some of the investment market. And it's generated a lot of interest recently from UK government as perhaps a source of untapped potential in the UK. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that market in general. How do you work or consider university spin-outs, or perhaps is there something this community could do to make more of that?
Yeah. So we agree, I think, that there's untapped potential in our universities, that if we could get better at technology transfer, we'd have more companies spinning out and being successful commercially. And how do you make that happen then, I suppose, or how do you start to do more of that? Again, we've approached it in two ways. We invest specifically in funds that focus on identifying potential spin-out opportunities. So we're an investor in Cambridge Innovation Capital, which does a lot of spin-outs, as you'll be aware. A recent investment has been in Northern Gritstone, again focused on universities in the north of England to pull fantastic research out of those institutions and make them into successful companies. And then the other way we do it is through the direct deep tech fund, because we are always on the lookout for very exciting companies. So we're tracking those sorts of spin-outs. We might not come in at the stage when they're raising their first round of finance, but we start to track them so that we can come in later and bigger as they start to require that scale-up capital. So there's huge amounts more to do, we think, in the university spin-out world. It's something that we're focused on, and we actually over-index in that sector. So if you look at the underlying portfolio that we've built, I think 15% of what we've done is university spin-outs, which is higher than what you would see in the general VC market, and that's not accidental.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we certainly hope there's more to come in that direction. Maybe changing subject just a little, and I thought it was great that diversity came up in the last topic, and I noted you're a board member of the Rose Review Board, and it's probably quite an open question with the opportunity of this audience of people with a lot of levers perhaps contribute, make a difference, and more inclusive investment, more inclusive scaling companies. Mm-hmm. Is there any thoughts or asks of this community that you'd like to make from your experience of working with the Rose Review Board that's made such a difference so far?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing to say is that we do lead the US in this area. Our industry is more diverse than you would see typically in Silicon Valley. That's the good news. The bad news is we've got a long way to go. So we're more diverse versus the US venture system, but that's a very low bar to beat. And it was said in the earlier intervention, I think, that if you're not taking advantage of all the talent that you have within your ecosystem, then you're missing a trick. So for us, it's not just because it's the socially just thing to do. You actually end up with better outcomes if you build more diverse teams. And if you look at the team that I put together for British Patient Capital when we started the business in 2018, I deliberately had a team that didn't look like a VC team that you would find in most other places, on most other websites that you would look at. And I think that has led to a different profile of investments that we've made. There's much more of a focus that we have in understanding how our managers think about diversity, not just within their own firms and who the decision makers are, but also how diverse is their underlying portfolio. And if you're casting your net always in the same direction and everybody's casting their net in that very narrow place, you're going to come out with quite similar outcomes. If you take the plunge and actually think about a broader opportunity set, you're going to have a more interesting portfolio, and more interesting strategically and commercially is our belief in that. So I think what we've tried to focus on at the bank and within British Patient Capital is to try and work out what are those practical actions that you can take that really makes a difference, that moves the dial on diversity. And we've just commissioned a piece of research which is called What Works. It's going to be launched very shortly at the beginning of July. And there are some definite themes that those VC firms that are more successful in terms of building diverse teams and portfolios can represent compared to some less diverse teams in the market. So I think that will be a piece of research that I hope will resonate with the community. And as and when it's launched, I can't sort of give you the details today. It'd be wonderful if you had a look at that and think about what can you do within your own communities to take those very practical learnings into how we get a more diverse VC ecosystem built in Europe.
Certainly, yeah. And those messages around the commercial performance, something we've looked at across the SETsquared portfolio, and for sure that data's come through strong, that the generation of companies going through that have more diverse founders, more diverse teams, even just in more gender balance, they're outperforming their peers, the all-male teams or the all-male white teams commercially quite significantly. Yeah. we've got time for one more question, I think. Keep an eye on our clock. And if you don't mind, it was recently announced that you'll be moving on from British Patient Capital in the near future. 7 years with the bank overall, I guess first with British Business Investments, and then the first CEO of British Patient Capital. So it felt like a nice opportunity maybe for a little bit of reflection and a bit of forward looking. So, if you don't mind, I was just wondering if you could share perhaps what you're most proud of your time with British Patient Capital, and what would be a hope or wish for the future?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So when I joined the British Business Bank in 2016, I originally came in to, first of all, rebuild or restructure the private debt business that was being run through BBI, but also to take the bank on what we were calling a pivot to equity, because on looking at the British Business Bank, which was a new institution back then in 2016, and what it did, I felt if you didn't have an equity offering, and specifically if you didn't have a venture capital equity offering, then you wouldn't be able to fulfill your function and mission as a development bank. I have to say, with the arrival of British Patient Capital, that pivot became something of a catapult, which I'm delighted about. And I was pleased to have been, if you like, the right person with the right skill set at the right time to help the bank go on that journey. There was huge skepticism at the time that we could build a business like British Patient Capital within the public sector. I always believed it was doable, but there were lots of naysayers and skeptics out there. So I think it is, as I look back, 5 years in, we have built a really successful business that's doing what we set out to do and is having an impact in the market, I believe, both as a central funder for the VC community, but also starting to look at those areas of the VC market that are underserved by the VC community. So I'm very proud of where we've got to. I think there's an awful lot more to do. I think the next big challenge is to try and unlock private sector capital for this space, because I believe the government can be catalytic in this area, but for the full potential of the VC industry to be unlocked, you need much more capital than the government is going to be able to provide. So I would hope that this next iteration of British Patient Capital's journey would involve working with private sector providers of capital as well, and not just Treasury. Not that Treasury isn't wonderful, and I'm incredibly grateful for that first £2.5 billion cheque that Chancellor Hammond wrote, which was the easiest £2.5 billion I've raised in my career, I have to say. And I hope that Chancellor Hammond as well would be very pleased with the outcomes that we've had. So I love starting businesses. I love building businesses. I've started and built a business which I think is a good foundation for the next leader of BPC to come in and take into the next iteration.
Oh, fantastic. Sadly, I think we could chat all day, but we have run out of time. So just thank you very much, Catherine, for your time. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.